This guy has been one of the most popular topics during Georgia's offseason because of the hype around him, and the hype around Carson Beck has earned him the top odds to win the Heisman Trophy in 2024. A Georgia Bulldog is favored to win the Heisman this season. Heisman is not something, it's something that gets talked about, but it's not something that happens for Georgia very often, right? Stetson Bennett in 2022 coming in fourth in the voting and being invited to the ceremony is the closest that Georgia has gotten to a Heisman Trophy in 30 years. Now Georgia's winning, competing and winning national championships, and that's a much bigger priority than getting a player an individual award like the Heisman Trophy. But it is a big deal. It is mostly, for the most part, a quarterback award, and that's part of what Carson Beck. That's part of the reasoning behind Carson Beck's big time odds. There's some other reasons. He is going to be the face of this offense. All right, Brock Bowers not being on Georgia's team, there not being like a marquee superstar offensive player on Georgia's team. Part of the reason why Carson Beck is getting elevated in terms of his odds, because he is going to be the most popular name on Georgia's offense, and he is going to be the quarterback of what looks like is the best team in the country, if not one of the best teams in college football, and those players are always going to get a good look. If you look at the odds, Quinn Ewers at the top, around plus 750 odds, but there's a streak he needs to break, and it's that the Heisman frontrunners don't really win ever. So can Carson Beck break the streak of Heisman odds where you're one of the top, you're like top one or two guys? They don't usually win. I went back, kind of looking at like the last 10 years roughly, how many times has the favorite actually won? And the answer is not really. Yes, guys that start out in top 3, top 5 odds, they've won before, but the guy that everyone thinks, hey, this is the most likely Heisman, doesn't usually win. So can Carson Beck not only bring a Heisman to Georgia, win a Heisman, can he break a little bit of a streak and be a guy that has a season that people expected him to have? I don't know if these expectations are fair, something I'm going to talk about a little bit, but let's talk about this streak. Ryan Curley from Dawg Post here, talking about Carson Beck winning the Heisman. Can he do something that doesn't really happen that often? And it's do what people expect. Go win the Heisman Trophy. Right now, certain people, you look at experts, if they're going to bet on somebody, they're going to bet on Carson Beck. People are expecting Georgia's offense to take a step forward in year 2 of Carson Beck being a starter, year 2 of Mike Bobo being the offensive coordinator during this stint. I have those expectations as well. I think that with chemistry, with time, with experience, things get better. I think that's evident across all sports. I think it's evident in the history of college football. And I think it's been evident with Georgia. I think it was evident a few years ago when Stetson Bennett got better in his second year as the guy, his first real year as the guy. Well, Carson Beck was the guy last year, and he was told that a little bit before the season, but now he's got another offseason with that experience. He's got his bag, he's got his Lamborghini, and he's got all these people thinking that he's going to have a big year. What did Carson Beck do this past season? Almost 4,000 yards, 3,941, 24 touchdowns to 6 interceptions. It's a 4-to-1 ratio. That's pretty good. If you're, 4 touchdowns to 1 turnover is a pretty good ratio. Ran for a few touchdowns as well. Numbers that were close to getting him the Heisman ceremony towards the end of the year, but ultimately not enough. His numbers teetering off in those final 2 games before voting ends against Georgia Tech and then the SEC Championship against Alabama. He kind of gets knocked out of that race. Not that he was truly a candidate to win the thing, but he could have been a finalist, at least someone that they said, hey, you get an invitation to the ceremony. Well, that doesn't happen. So those are the numbers that got him, I don't think he finished top 10, but he was around that, right? So Heisman wasn't the super, super, super distant thing for Carson Beck in his first year as a starter. So now you would think that that's in better reach for him now, I guess is a good way to put it. The streak. Let's talk about that first. Let's go backwards. Heisman favorite this past season. Well, it was Caleb Williams, right? He's going to go back-to-back. It ends up being Jaden Daniels, a guy that wasn't even at the top of the odds, right? This guy wasn't cracking the top 5 of the odds. 2022, who's the favorite? Well, it's Bryce Young to possibly repeat, or CJ Stroud. No, Caleb Williams goes to USC and he wins it. He was obviously not at the very top of the odds. 2021, Spencer Rattler was one of the favorites. Well, it ends up being first-year starter Bryce Young. 2020, I couldn't find who the favorite was, but I'm going to tell you it wasn't Devontae Smith, the wide receiver, who won it. 2019, who was at the top? Tua Tagovailoa, Trevor Lawrence. Guess who won? Joe Burrow in his second year at LSU. 2018, Tua was a Heisman favorite, and he almost won, actually. It ends up being Kyler Murray who took it from him at the last second. 2016, guarantee you Lamar Jackson wasn't at the top of the odds. I don't even have to Google that one. He won that year. 2017, Baker Mayfield is kind of one, like, some people thought he was going to win, and he ended up being that winner that year. So that's kind of where it goes around 2017. All right, obviously, some of these top guys have won, but the guy that is the betting favorite doesn't usually win this thing. And you can kind of look at that as twofold in this race, and that's Quinn Ewers and Carson Beck. So this conversation also applies to Quinn Ewers. But for Carson, what actually has to happen for him to do this? You can look at a lot of these people's numbers. I didn't even really want to look at because I just know I don't know that Carson Beck can have certain stat lines. He's not going to have a Kyler Murray type of stat line. So there's no point in me looking at Kyler Murray's stats when he won that year. He's not going to have. Well, first of all, I don't think anyone ever will really have a Joe Burrow stat line again as far as like the 60 touchdowns. You know, can he have a Bryce Young stat line when Bryce Young won it? What did Bryce Young do in 2021? And he was kind of the clear Heisman, but it wasn't like this overwhelming Heisman. And I think that is more because of the way Georgia's offense runs, and I don't think Carson Beck's numbers are just going to be absolutely bonkers. I think you have to get to a more realistic number for him in terms of, okay, well, he can get these yards and these stats. That's what's going to wow people, along with winning games. Georgia being one of the contenders will help Carson Beck's case because it will show that he's helping lead a team. And I kind of look at like Bryce Young in 2021. 66.9% completion percentage. Well, Carson Beck can do better than that. He already did, 72% this past season, but 4,872 yards and 47 touchdowns versus 7 picks. So Carson would have to throw for about another 1,000 yards to get there. I don't think he has to throw for quite 4,800 to win this trophy, and there is no exact, but I'm just being honest in terms of if Georgia's this 12-0 team or 13-0 heading into the college football playoff, and Carson Beck throws 4,500 yards and 40 touchdowns, he's a Heisman finalist 100% if he's not winning the trophy. Because that's what Bryce Young getting he didn't have 47 touchdowns heading into that, right? He had more around early 40s. So early 40s, lower 40s. So for Carson, he's got to throw more, right? He'd have to have probably a little bit more attempts. Will Georgia be a little bit more pass happy this next year? I don't know what the running back situation is. I think that they're probably not just going to pound it with Etienne and Roger Robinson and all those guys. I don't think so. I can see Georgia passing the ball a little bit more this coming year, despite losing a Brock Bowers, despite losing Laviconke. I think that they loaded up on other weapons that they're comfortable with. Obviously, they brought them into Georgia. You return some guys like Dominic Lovett, Dylan Bell, Ra Thomas. They have plenty of very capable weapons, experienced tight ends like Oscar Delp. You get use of Urasek, I believe I'm pronouncing it right, coming over from Stanford. They have plenty of weapons for Carson Beck to deliver the ball to. One of the best offensive lines in college football. If they throw the ball a little bit more, and let's say Carson stays at that 72%, so he's still efficient, and he has 100 more attempts. Is that a good way to put it? Maybe 85 more attempts off of his 417. What did Bryce Young have? He ended up with 547, right? So let's say Carson ends up with 80 more attempts. He throws for another 500 yards. So he's throwing for about 4,500 yards. It's the touchdowns. Touchdowns. People want to see scoring, and who scored a lot? Lamar Jackson scored a lot of touchdowns. Kyler Murray scored a lot of touchdowns. Bryce Young obviously scored a lot of touchdowns in this thing. It's what hurt Stetson Bennett as well. It's the reason why Stetson Bennett was only a fringe Heisman contender. I think heading into the Heisman ceremony, he only had around 17, 18 passing touchdowns. It's about 7 rushing. He didn't even have 30 total touchdowns, and he was a Heisman finalist. Kind of a down Heisman year for Carson Beck. He didn't have 30 total touchdowns, so you need to have more than that 40 mark to get more consideration. And so Carson Beck, can he throw 15 more touchdowns than he did? Well, Georgia's offense is very different every game. It wasn't just about Brock Bowers. It wasn't just about Carson Beck. It has never been about one person. And most of the time when you win a Heisman Trophy, a lot of it is predicated, well, because we have this one guy. You would think now, it doesn't feel like Georgia has a clear superstar. Obviously, Brock Bowers is not part of the equation anymore. Now, superstar quarterbacks have thrown to superstar receivers and have won this award, and that's different. But now it feels like, well, this offense might need to be a little bit more reliant on Carson Beck, and I think that's part of why his odds have been so good to win this thing. Is he going to break it, though? He just needs to throw the touchdowns, man. That's the difference maker. He could be really efficient, throw for 4,000-something yards, probably close to that 4,500 mark. I think about Mac Jones' year when he was a Heisman runner-up behind Devontae Smith. I think he ended up second or third in voting that year, right? And Devontae Smith has a ridiculous season, and that was his teammate, so that coincided their success. But Mac Jones in his Heisman finalist year, well, 311 attempts, or 311 completions for 402. A little bit better of a completion percentage, 4,500 yards, 41 touchdowns to 4 picks, right? I think that 40 to 5 TD to INT ratio is a really good mark for Carson if he wants to win the Heisman. And look, if Carson Beck's having a Heisman-type season, Georgia's probably undefeated. And Georgia's probably the favorite to win the national championship. So before you say, well, this doesn't really matter. If Carson Beck's playing like this, it totally will matter. What else will matter is you signing up for our newsletter, which I'm linking down below. Thank you for watching.